Hey guys, this is KJ, but today on Gun Talk Hunt, you got Ryan Gresham talking to a guy we all want to be, Mr. David Draper, right here. Gun Talk Hunt is brought to you by Brownells, serious about firearms since 1939. Silencer Central, silence delivered. Timney Triggers, the world's finest triggers. Springfield Armory, and Smith & Wesson.
Welcome into Gun Talk Hunt. You may notice that we are not in the Gun Talk studio. We're actually on location, Scattergun Lodge out in South Dakota doing a pheasant hunt. And one of the many characters on this journey.
Character, probably, right?
Yeah, David Draper. So David with Peterson's Hunting.
Correct.
But you've been around the industry and in the hunting world for quite a while.
Yeah, a couple decades. I actually started at Cabela's fresh out of college as a catalog copywriter.
That's a fun gig right out of college.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. You know, as a guy that grew up loving to hunt and fish. I'm actually from Sidney, Nebraska anyway, which is headquarters of Cabela's back in the day. And got a job with them, and it kind of led me on a crazy career that's, you know, here I am, the editor of Peterson's Hunting now, sitting in a lodge. I can actually see a little bit of the Missouri River down there and the beautiful rolling breaks. It's a beautiful spot of the world, and we had a pretty good morning.
Yes, we did have a good morning. So I love pheasant hunting. I love all upland hunting. It's social.
Yes.
It's a different way of doing it. It's probably, for anybody who's thinking about getting into hunting, it's probably a good way to start, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. You know, a lot of people get started small game, squirrel, rabbit. I actually got started more on the bird side. My family has a farm out there in western Nebraska that had pheasants on it. My dad was also a big waterfowler. And, you know, everyone has their own motivations for hunting or why they like certain types of hunting. But I'm with you for upland bird hunting and also waterfowling. It's such a social sport or social pastime. You know, when you're out there with your buddies, you're having a good time, you know, giving each other crap about the misses, celebrating your wins when you hit stuff. So that's one thing I really love about birding. And you're right, it's a good way to get started and get into the game because you don't need a lot. You need a shotgun and a pocket full of shells and a little bit of open space.
It's a good point, especially in the Midwest or West. There's a lot of areas where you can just walk but it helps to have maybe a good dog.
Yeah, a good dog definitely aids in it. I grew up, we didn't have sporting dogs growing up. We were bird hunters, but my dad's buddies did. So I'd always, hunted over dogs, but we didn't. We had a house dog growing up, but we didn't have a bird dog. And I didn't get bird dogs until in college. And it changes the game, and it changes your enjoyment of the hunt. It changes why you hunt. It makes you a more successful hunter in a lot of cases. I mean, dogs add so much added aspect to the hunt game.
It's funny because whether it's quail or pheasant or whatever, you would not find a lot of these birds without a dog. No. You could walk around, walk a fence row or walk a field, and you're not gonna even kick them up. No. And then much less when you shoot them, you might not find them.
Yeah, definitely tough to find. And like in some of the cover we're hunting today, just think if we wouldn't have had dogs, I think we would have walked past pheasants. Because that cover was so thick in places in some of those milo fields. And I think, the bird will just hunker down and let you walk by. Add a bit of a dog that has a great nose, he's going to find that bird and work it up and get it up. So you're right. And then once you knock a bird down in heavy cover, I mean, having a dog is a lifesaver. It really is.
Yeah. So talk about Locke, your dog.
Yep. So I have a yellow lab, Locke. L-O-C-H is his name. It's funny. I've had 3 labs in my lifetime, 2 blacks, and he's a yellow. And I've always gone with Irish names for some reason. I'm Heinz 57. I'm not Irish, but I spent some time over in Ireland out of college. So Dublin was my first one. Angus was my second one. It's A-E-N-G-U-S, which is an island or a fort on an island off the coast of Ireland. And then so this one I wanted to name him. I decided Locke, and that's L-O-U-G-H in Irish or in English, but the Irish spell it L-O-U-G-H. And Tess, my girlfriend, was like, no one will ever be able to pronounce that. So we actually went L-O-C-H, Locke, like a Scottish Locke. Sure. So, because he is a British lab. I got him out of Southern Oak Kennels down in Mississippi. He's just about 4, and he's trained himself more than I've ever trained him. He's a brilliant dog.
He's impressive.
And does great work. And that's not necessarily a reflection of me. It's really a reflection on what his breeding is and what he's learned. This is his 3rd or 4th, he's 4, so this is at least his 3rd trip to South Dakota, but he's come up with my girlfriend a couple times as well. And up here is like a master class for dogs because there's so many birds. if a dog screws up a bird, it gives him a chance to learn, and it doesn't really make you that mad because there'll be more birds at some point.
Right.
So I've always said South Dakota is a master class for dogs, and he was up here his very first year and just, he's figured it out.
I mean, you think about it, between yesterday and today, and we had a lot of dogs. It wasn't just Locke.
No.
But he's fast.
Yes.
And I mean, how many retrieves did he get in the past 2 days?
There's 8 of us hunting. I think today, I didn't really keep track today, but I bet he retrieved 30 birds today, this morning alone.
Yeah.
He retrieved probably 30 birds.
Live birds.
Probably, we didn't kill as many yesterday because the conditions were tougher, but I bet he another 15 or 20 yesterday. So 50 retrieves in 2 days. And not to mention the birds that we didn't kill, that we missed, that he still got up or worked, so just... That's what I say. It's a masterclass. In any other situation, you're not going to get 50 retrieves a season.
Oh, right. Absolutely.
Or in 2 seasons even.
Yeah.
So that's one thing cool about hunting up here is, and when you have a dog that's a good bird dog or has potential to be a good bird dog, he can learn so much up here in South Dakota at these places.
Remington Ammunition. We all know them. We all love them. And you know what? We just love them for bringing back production. They are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to bring you some of the finest ammunition out there. And we all know Core Locked. We all grew up with it, but now they've got Core Lock Tip. The next generation of bullet from Remington is now the most deadly mushroom in the woods. So head on over to Remington.com to learn more about Remington Core Lock Tip today. And Timney Triggers. We talk a lot about Timney Triggers on here because we trust them. We install them. We know how they operate, and we can rely upon them to break that shot cleanly. And the newest trigger from Timney is a top customer request, a dedicated CZ model 457 rimfire trigger. The CZ 457 trigger is adjustable for pull, weight, and over travel. It's a nice design, it's sleek, and it features Timney's new sear engagement adjustment lock design for a user-friendly experience. Visit timneytriggers.com to learn more. Brownells, ready to hit the range or field, but lack a little bit of ammunition? I think we're all feeling that pinch right now. Head on over to brownells.com/ammunition to learn more about how you can find your next hunting partner, whether it's 308 Winchester, maybe you're hunting some ground squirrels or something like that and want to shoot a 17 HMR. They got you covered over at brownells.com.
Talk about Scattergun where we are, because there are a lot of nice lodges, there are a lot of nice places. This is a kind of a special one.
Yeah, Scattergun is cool, and I've hunted several lodges in South Dakota and other places around the country as well. But what Chuck and Sheila have here, like I said, the view that we're looking out on is beautiful. It's just beautiful open country. They do the cover right. It is quote unquote preserved, but these birds are unlike any birds I've ever shot at other person. These birds fly great. They're beautiful long-tailed birds. It's not like they're not getting up. In some places, preserved birds just don't fly very well. These birds are just like a wild bird, and in a lot of cases, you don't know the difference.
You really don't notice.
So, and I think that's just testament to how Chuck and his staff have figured out how to supplement the birds throughout the season. It's not like they just, okay, you guys are going out today, we're going to go put a bunch of birds in this field for you.
Right.
They supplement it throughout the season. I believe. I don't know his exact pattern, and that you can just tell these birds are just great, just wonderful birds.
So we've been having fun doing this, but you've been doing some hunting already this season. Talk about some of those.
Yeah, so it's been it's only mid-October, and I've had a pretty good year already this year. Started out in California and hunted black-tailed deer in a vineyard, Steinbeck Vineyards, and that was really fun. Yeah, it was pretty cool to see. It's hot weather out there in August in California, and to see how those deer relate to the shade in those vines in that vineyard, and how they move throughout the day as the sun changes and the shade moves, and it's such thick cover. We weren't hunting a ton of property, but you wouldn't see deer, and then you'd see them just because those vineyards are so they would be tough to find in there. Yeah, and you're kind of going around the outside, driving the outside of the vineyards and looking down lanes, but they can take one step left or right, and you're just not going to see them. Or if you see them and then try to make a the stock on them, they can disappear like that. It was a really cool hunt.
So you got one?
Yep, shot a blacktail there. And then in September, we have a muzzleloader season for antelope in Nebraska, and it's one of my favorite seasons because it falls September 15th, it usually opens, and those antelope are really in the rut. I think peak rut's like September 22nd, somewhere in there for an antelope, and they respond really well to decoys. I hunt a lot of private land. It's a muzzleloader, so I can see, I feel safe using a decoy with a muzzleloader, and man, if it works, those antelope will come on a charge. Now this year I didn't need my decoy, I actually just snuck up on one, and it's pretty cool. I killed this antelope with a muzzleloader that I killed my very first antelope with, a traditional Hawken. I didn't use an inline like most people.
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean 21 years ago I killed my first antelope with that exact same hawk.
All right, tell me the story of this one this year.
Yeah.
How did it go?
So I'd like to tell you that it was a crazy challenging hunt. I had a lot of property to work on. A lot of my neighbors were really good about letting me on, and so I literally just driving down the road saw a herd out in the middle of a field where you can't get anywhere close to them, but I was able to hide my truck behind some bins and just put the sneak on him and get within 96 yards, open sights. That's, I needed to get as close as I can.
Yeah.
And my vision doesn't quite work the way they used to, so I was able to just get on him and make a good shot at him and dropped him where he stood. So.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, this is a 50 cal?
54 caliber, actually.
54.
425 grain Hornady Great Plains Buffalo bullet. It's a chunk of lead.
That'll get, he just fell down from the weight of the bullet.
Exactly, exactly. The impact alone. So that's probably, I mean, I have a couple more hunts coming up, but that was just pretty cool to, and I didn't even think about it with that Hawken. I just wanted to use it again this year because I always like to use it during that muzzleloader season. But then I realized that's the same gun I killed my very first antelope with 21 years ago.
It's an interesting thing, especially for hunters, of these guns that we use on these events growing up and how important they are to us.
Yeah.
Or even, and this sounds maybe even more peculiar, is we'll have an affinity or a special connection to a cartridge.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And that doesn't make sense on the surface.
No, but you do. You kind of fall in love with and it's so varied. Like some guys are big Magnum guys, so they like, and it makes them manly because they could take the recoil and all that sort of stuff. Other guys want fast, Like I fell in love with the 25-06, and it's funny. I fell in love with the 25-06 not that many years ago. Like the 6.5 Creedmoor got popular, and then I was like, no, I want a 25-06, and I was like, 30 years ago or whatever, that was a popular cartridge.
Right.
But it's fast. It hits hard. It's a smaller bullet, but man, I just feel like it's just a laser. I mean, I've killed a Coues deer in Mexico with it. I killed an outad with it. We should never hunt outad with a 25-06. It's just not
one bigger bullet.
They're tough critters. But I killed him dead, hit him in the heart, and then hit him on the run on the second shot and dropped him dead. I just feel like a 25-06 is a death laser.
Well, and if you shoot it well,
that's anything. That's always the argument. It's.
So talk about Coues deer, because that's kind of a special one. That's different. Most people don't get to experience that.
No, and I haven't got to do it in Arizona yet, which I'd like to do sometime, but I did go down to Mexico and hunt Coues deer. Used Mossberg Patriot and 25-06 on that hunt, and super optics intensive. Man, you basically just sit on a hillside all day long and just pick apart countryside, because they'll disappear in a second, and if you take your eyes off them for a second, they disappear and they reappear. And the challenge when I was in, my guide down there didn't speak any English.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so you'd be looking at these giant hillsides with full of yucca and cactus and tall grass, and you'd see a deer, and you'd have to, he and I kind of have to figure out through the language barrier, like, okay, where on the hillside is he? We hold up our hand and point to it, and I know very little Spanish from college, a little bit, like, I know a little bit of the direction. So it was kind of fun figuring out, by the second or third day, we had it down pat. We could figure it out. But on day one, it was a bit of I don't know what you're looking at.
And the Coues deer are kind of known to be little ghosts.
Yeah, the gray ghost is the nickname for them. And they're the same colors that country you're glassing. They're not a big deer, and they just can disappear instantly.
What's the weight on a Coues deer body, you think?
That's a good question, but I'd say like 120 to 150 pounds. They're not a big deer. So, and like I said, their coloration and the country they live in is just such dense, thick, nasty cover. Not like big trees, but just like cholla cactus, yucca, all that grasses and stuff, and they just disappear in an instant. Scrub oak and stuff like that. So it's very optic intensive, man. You sit there with a pair of 15 power binoculars on a tripod just all day long and pick apart the country. And then figure out how to get close once you find one, or try to get a shot on one. Yeah. So it's usually longer shots.
Okay, so for glassing, do you have a preference on, like you described, big binos or a spotting scope, or how do you?
What I like, at least for that game, is a pair of binos, that like a 15 power big pair of binos that you can tripod mount, because it's just a lot more relaxing than trying. A spotting scope is great for once you find a deer, and if it's stationary, then you can judge it a little bit better.
Sure.
Get your spotting scope out, zoom in to 30 or 60 power, and figure out, okay, that's a deer we want to go after, or it's not, or whatever. But for just like all day glassing, there's binos on a tripod, you just can't be beat. And then that goes for mule deer in big country as well, any of that stuff. So it's nice to have the spotter there, like I said, for judging trophy quality or that sort of stuff. But for just general trying to find a deer in big country.
Another tip that for people listening, if you are using a spotting scope and you're on a spotting scope all day, you probably know this one, is people will bring an eye patch.
Yeah.
You put on an eye patch, that way you don't have to squint your non-dominant eye the whole time, and you don't get as tired. You can leave both eyes open.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great tip. Another thing I like to do, especially on bright days, is you can kind of put a hood or a blanket over you to kind of cut out all that ambient light, and that'll help you too as well focus in on stuff and let you get less eye fatigue and less fatigue in general that way. Because that's the one thing about those type of hunts that are very optics intensive. It goes for outad, it goes for coos deer, it goes for high country mule deer. It's fatiguing even though you're just sitting there. It's mentally draining. And like you said, your vision, and your eyes, you got to look away and refocus close and refocus far outside the binos every now and again, just to get your your vision back almost. Because if you're just staring through those binos for hours at a time and just picking apart little country in almost like a grid, you try to mentally pick a grid on a mountainside or a hillside, and then just okay, look at this grid, every inch of that grid, and then the next one.
Especially something like an outad where they can be hard to see. Mm-hmm. They're the exact same color as the country they're in.
It's the same colored country they're in. So. Yeah. And can disappear. And for being a bigger critter, they can disappear in some of those basalt columns in those big country that they live in West Texas too. It's pretty crazy how animals like that can reappear and disappear in an instant.
Hodgdon Powder Company, thank you for your support, because you know what? Without you, we would all be up a stream and loading our own ammunition with just throwing our load data to the wind. But because of Hodgdon's reloading data center, we can go in there and customize our loads and understand, because that's important, especially for new guys. The seasoned guys, they really do know, what they want and what powder they need. Us new guys like me need to understand which powders work and which powders do not work, because that's the last mistake you will make when reloading. So head on over to HodgdonReloading.com to know how you can customize your powders to fit the loads you want to develop. Silencer Central. Now I'm walking through this process now, and I'm eagerly waiting for a Banish 30 to show up at my doorstep. I'm getting regular communication about Silencer Central and what they are going through to get me my silencer delivered to my door. They figured it out. They gave me the paperwork to fill out. They gave me the fingerprints to go ahead and do myself, so I can do all this process without leaving my home. And that's important, because who really wants to get outside these days, right? Unless you're hunting, of course. But I'm waiting for that Banish 30 to show up, and I can only do that from the comfort of my home with Silencer Central. Go over to silencercentral.com to find out how you, too, can have a silencer delivered right to your door. Springfield Armory's Model 2020 Waypoint is favored among the Gun Talk family here. Ryan might not admit it, but he is a big fan of this rifle, and so am I, because I've carried it in the field many times. The carbon fiber stock is premium and lightens the weight just enough to where if you're on a Western hunt or you're traipsing through the woods, you don't add the extra poundage in today's modern rifles. Sometimes they're just weigh just a little bit more than I'd like. But it's sub-MOA guaranteed, so you know it's accurate, and the Springfield Armory radial brake reduces recoil and diverts gases, keeping you on target. Visit springfield-armory.com to find more today.
You've done a ton of hunts, and most people who are into hunting, they kind of hunt their little area, right? Mm-hmm. If you're from the east, maybe you hunt whitetail, maybe you hunt ducks, or if you're in the west, they all do a couple species. Yeah. But if someone was to say, hey David, I've done the regular stuff. I've duck hunted a lot, I've deer hunted a lot, but I want to do something different. Is there a particular type of hunt or maybe a destination that you say, this is a good one to go, do something that's different?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's very doable and very challenging, but a good bang for the buck is Outad. I love Outad in West Texas. I like West Texas anyway. I mean, I'm a creature of the high plains in western Nebraska where there's not a tree to be seen. I just like open country, and Texas is that. But you also have some, like I said, those basalt columns, those little mountainous areas, the Davis Mountains, the Chihuahuan Desert.
Yeah, that's right. It's not all flat.
No.
When you get out there.
Yeah, and it's just really cool country. And Outad is like, it's always called, and it's gotten a little more pricey in recent years, but it's always called the poor man's sheep hunt because it's just like sheep hunting, except, you're not paying $20,000 or $50,000 for a sheep hunt. And, and it's not probably as rugged country and nasty conditions other than the heat maybe, but it's just, optics intensive. You sit there, you try to find them, and then you try to figure out how to get to them because a lot of times they're up on a cliff somewhere and you got to figure out, okay, how am I going to get up there and get the shot? And they're just really cool creatures, man. The Barbary sheep. I think it was right after World War II, if I remember right, when they brought some over and they just, took off because it's, a lot like North Africa's a lot like West Texas.
I got a funny story about Outad. I don't know if you've been to the FTW Ranch.
Yep, I have. So.
But Tim Fallon, who owns that, he was telling us that he said some comment as we were hanging out. He goes, "Yeah, but if you see an Outad, just shoot that son of a." I was like, "What?" Yeah. He goes, "Yeah, we had some Outad. And there's still a couple roaming around the ranch. The ranch is huge, 12,000 acres. Yeah. But he said the problem is they're jerks, and they will just beat up stuff just to beat it up. Oh, really? And so they have feeders out there because they have a lot of exotic animals and ones that they have some very interesting breeding programs that they're actually saving these very rare species. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But he said the Outad, they'll go knock over the feeders, they'll tear them up because then. They welded rebar poking out of the feeders to discourage the Outad from headbutting the feeders. Outad didn't care. They just headbutted it and put holes in their horns, and now it's nobody wants to shoot this torn up Outad. Yeah, but stubborn and hard headed comes to mind.
That is an Outad, and like I said, super tough and just a cool critter. The biggest challenge is, and the argument I always say, Outad would be the perfect game animal, except they don't taste real great. You can make them edible. You can make anything edible. It's more like they're just tough animals, and their meat is tough, like
goats.
So exactly. That's all. I've always been like, if they only tasted delicious, they'd be the perfect game animal.
Well, that's a perfect transition. So you are big into cooking as well.
I do like to cook. I was a latchkey kid growing up. Both my parents worked, and if I wanted to eat after school, I had to cook it myself. Yeah.
So do you have some favorite game recipes or favorite game?
Yeah, one thing I really like, there's a couple things I really like to do. So I love duck hunting. One of my favorite things is duck hunting. And so I like to do what we do as my buddies and I do a coffee-based rub. A little coffee, a little brown sugar, some paprika, maybe some red chili pepper, stuff like that. Rub the duck with it, then grill it medium rare. Grill it real hot so the skin gets crispy, but then medium rare. Mm. And then I slice it real thin, and I make it's mojo de ajo. It's orange juice and garlic and onion, a little sauce that I grill as well with the duck breast, and then make tacos out of it. And it's just I say they're the world's best tacos. They're so delicious. And then another thing I love is shank meat, like the shank of a deer or elk or anything that I cross-cut in ossobuco. A lot of people are doing that nowadays with their game meat. Real low, slow presentation. It's super easy. I do mine in my Dutch oven. I saute up some onions, and then I just brown those, throw some garlic in there, a couple cans of tomatoes, diced tomatoes or whatever, and I just let it cook all day. Oh, that's awesome. Serve it over polenta, like a Sunday gravy or something. It's just fantastic.
I have a buddy who was, in his former life, was a chef, an actual chef, and he's a big hunter, and he swears that on ducks, he just started where he basically dry ages them in the fridge for like a week. Yeah. He'll the duck breasts, don't cover it, just set it on a plate in the fridge for like a week.
Just dry age it like that.
And then he's like, I sear it like steak. Yeah. Done.
That's what I always say about it. People that don't like duck, if they're overcooking it. Duck does get tough and livery when you overcook it. Unless you cook it for a long time and braise it and break it down and shred it, which you can do as well. Right. But if you just cook a duck breast just like you cook your steak, as long as you like a steak medium or medium rare, it's fantastic. Yeah. So that's a good way to do it. And then speaking of aging, I age almost all my game. I built a walk-in cooler a few years ago. So, I mean, some of that, I age my game out of laziness. I get home at the end of the day and I just hang it in my walk-in cooler.
I think I feel like aging it. Yeah. I'm going to go take a shower.
There's some of that, but I've done up to 50 days. I did a 50 days on a bull elk. Wow. Quartered him out and hung him in my walk-in cooler 50 days.
The whole thing?
Yeah. And the 50 days was probably a little long. strong. It had a little funk smell to it, like any aged game or aged beef does. You know, it's kind of controlled rot is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Had a little funky smell to it, but man, he was delicious and literally like tender as veal. Man, it was. Yeah, it's really impressive. I think for aging game, I found the sweet spots like 24 to 28 days, but that one I just wanted to see how long I could go.
Let's see what happens. Yeah. Wow.
So, but
I guess
think anytime you can pheasant, duck, any of that sort of stuff that you can age a little bit, it's always going to be that's added benefit. It's always better that way. So.
Well, and also kind of going back to antelope, that's one that I always say it's usually hot, and the temptation is to kill an antelope, especially if you have several people. Yeah. Now let's go drive around and kill more antelope. And it's like, no, guys, we can't let this thing sit in the pickup truck for 2-3 hours.
That's the funny thing. Everyone talks about. A lot of people are like, oh, I've heard antelope's horrible. And it literally is my favorite game meat. Antelope by far. And
I love it.
Axis deer are great. Black-tailed deer are wonderful. Caribou's wonderful. But hands down, I love pronghorn antelope more than anything. And it's because you got to take care of the meat. I mean, I'll admit, a pronghorn antelope smells. That fur has that, or that hair, hollow hair has that certain goaty smell. But get that off them and get them cooled down. And you're right, 100% people who say, oh, I shot an antelope and it tasted horrible, it's because they didn't treat it right. They threw it in the back of the truck, they drove around the rest of the day, and it's 95 degrees in September in Wyoming, and that antelope just, got stanky, really.
That's a different type of aging.
Exactly. That's not the controlled age you want. So, get that body caddy cool down, get the skin off as soon as you can, and you're going to have prime venison. One of my favorites.
One that I haven't had yet, but I've heard great things, is axis deer.
Axis deer is fantastic. And it's funny, like axis deer, and I always say this about, and Sitka blacktail, I'll shoot on Kodiak, they're, like when you pick up an axis deer or one of those blacktail, they're dense, they're heavy for their size, because they're not like really big game animals, but I just feel like they're muscle. And I'm like, well, they grew up around tigers and grizzly bears. Like, they evolved. That's axis deer from India. It's a chittal, Chital is what they're from India originally, so they evolved around tigers. And so that I just feel like that meat's it, but it's so delicious. It's such delicious meat.
It's tiger deer.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So. Axis is one of my favorite. Like I said, caribou. A lot of people love elk, and elk's good to me, but to me, it's just mild and really close to beef.
Maybe not as interesting.
Exactly. So
it's kind of interesting. I think the more game meat you try, you start venturing towards the stuff that tastes interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
You start, maybe there's the gateway of like an elk where it's like, oh yeah, I like this. Yeah. Well, it's basically beef.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you talk about a gateway. I always, one of the classic preparations for game meat, especially doves, is dove poppers or duck poppers. And I always say those are the gateway drugs. People are like, I don't like duck. Okay, I'll make you a duck popper, which is cream cheese and jalapeno, duck and bacon. And
wrapped
that tastes good. And exactly. Yeah. And so that's the gateway drug. That gets you like, okay, maybe I do like duck. Okay, now let me prepare it this way and see what you think. And then they're like, oh yeah, duck is good. Yeah, I know.
And we were just talking the other day about sous vide.
Yeah.
I did antelope roast in that for 10 hours, and it's great because it's very easy to overcook game meat, and when you do that, it's very easy to dry it out. It's just not great.
Yeah.
But that's about foolproof.
I think for cooking game, sous vide is a almost essential tool if you're pretty serious about cooking and you want to do it, because game meat's lean, there's not a lot of intramuscular fat, and that sous vide, you can control the temp. I think for pheasant breast, sous vide is one of the best tools. I'll take pheasant breast and I'll throw just a butter and maybe a couple sprigs of rosemary in there, a little salt and pepper, and sous vide it, and you can get that right temp because pheasant breast will dry out like that.
Yeah, so you're on a razor's edge.
Exactly, but you can set that temp exactly where you want it, and I think for roasts, and I do a lot of that ossobuco. I've done that sous vide as well.
Oh yeah.
So just throw it in there overnight, and then the next day you're done.
So it seems like most people who I hunt with like to cook.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, because it's like, well, wait a minute, I get to take this deer home or these ducks, and I got to, even if you're not even into cooking, it kind of it encourages you to get into it.
I think so too, and it's funny. Anthony Bourdain had a great quote from this episode when he was in the Ozarks. I think it was the Ozarks. He said something like, "I like to hang around hunters because they're always great cooks." Yeah. Because they, I mean, like you said, we have all this. If you're a good hunter, you have a plethora of game meat, and if you're a responsible hunter, you want to make it the best you can. You want to honor that animal by making a great meal, and even if that is just a duck popper, because duck poppers are delicious. I'm not going to argue with that. Like, if no matter what it is, you want to honor that animal by making great meals with it. And truthfully, we rarely eat domestic meat. I raise a couple pigs every year. Usually, I didn't this year, but then so we'll do that. And my girlfriend Tess, her family is a cattle family, so every once in a while she jones us for a beefsteak, so we'll get some beefsteaks. Yeah. You know, if I'm in a restaurant, obviously I'll eat domestic meat, but at home we eat almost exclusively wild game. So
good stuff.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
And we also have where some big celebrities like a Joe Rogan and some of those guys are making it even more known and I guess accepted or whatever.
Yeah, they're called trendy or whatever. And
trendy.
And it's funny, you've seen this window, 20 years ago, hunting was all about the trophy and the antler size and all that. And, you had guys like Rogan, Ranella, and a few other folks that really moved that meat movement into it. So now, it's a lot more, everyone wants to hunt for meat, and it's more acceptable to say you hunt for meat. It used to be I hunted for a trophy, and that's what made you cool, is these big old antlers. And now it's like, I'm out there to feed my family. And also that it came along with like the carnivore diet, Whole30 diet, people wanted to eat healthier. You start to see some, negative news about the way livestock is raised in America, for better or for worse, but there is that negative connotation out there as well. And so I think all that came together and it just created this movement into hunters that really now it's about the meat, and we all want to cook it.
And now we have a lot of hunters out there.
Yeah, and that's the downside now. I think there's too many hunters.
It's a lot of competition for permits.
Exactly. That's funny. We've all of us in our space, we've always encouraged getting more and more hunters into the woods. But that's also true. Part of us are also like when we go to our trailhead and there's 3 new trucks there that weren't there last year. You're like, new hunters.
Dang it! I mean, I'm glad you're here, but geez,
exactly.
Can you come back on Tuesday?
I want to mentor new hunters as long as they don't hunt my spot.
Right. Well, thanks for being with us, man.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. I'm glad you come along on this trip, and this is kind of an annual event for us, and I know you were here a few years ago with your dad, so it's great to see you again.
It's awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, that's it for us. We'll see you next time on Gun Talk Hunt.